welcome to the second episode of our channel, The Indic Insights. In the previous video on Panchatantra, I had talked about how ancient Indians used storytelling to teach complex subjects like dharma and niti. However, did you know that apart from storytelling, they also developed innovative indoor games to teach subjects like philosophy and warfare? In fact, those games are still an integral part of our daily lives. I'm talking about games like Snakes and Ladders, chess, Ludo, and card games. Yes, all of these games have their origin in ancient India. In fact, their antiquity stretches all the way back to Indus Valley civilization. In Lothal, an archaeological site from 2400 BC, chess pieces identical to the ones used today have been discovered. Game boards and terracotta dice have also been found at Lothal. In another site called Rakhigari, game boards, checkerboards, and dices made of terracotta have been found. So let's trace the antiquity of these games one by one. First, let's talk about snakes and ladders. Snakes and ladders originated from an ancient Indian version of the game called Gyan Chopar. But how did the game originate? Was it randomly created for entertainment, or was there something more profound at work? Well, it turns out that the cream of entire ancient Indian philosophy that takes its roots from the Upanishads was condensed into this one game. You may ask me how. Gyan Chopper is slightly different from the version of snakes and ladders that we see today. There were meanings attached to the snake and ladders. The boxes did not contain numbers. Instead, it was associated with sins and virtues. Ladders took players from a lower level of virtue to a higher level of virtue, while snakes brought you down from one sin to another. The final goal was usually moksha or vaikuntha or brahmaloka, depending on the traditions of the region where the game was popular. Ladders would take you from bhakti to vaikuntha, while snakes would bring you down from ahamkara to maya. There would be more snakes than ladders, signifying that attaining moksha or liberation was hard, while succumbing to vices and slipping into maya was easier. One sin would nullify the fruits of many of your virtues. These ideas, as we know, form the basis of ancient Indian philosophy. There were different versions of snakes and ladders all over India with different names, such as Gyan Chopar, Moksha Path, Gyan Bazi, Nagapasa, and so on. There were variations in the number of squares too. For example, Golak Dham was a version of the game that was extremely popular in Assam and Bengal. It had 64 squares. In the 1890s, the game reached England and it took the present form where the morality aspect of the game slowly vanished and it became a game of numbers. A fun fact, the idiom back to square one has its roots from this very game. While Gyan Chopar taught spirituality, chess was developed to teach strategy and warfare. It was known as Chaturanga in ancient India. Chaturanga means four limbs, which signifies the four divisions of the army or Akshahini. Akshahini is a battle formation that finds its mention in the Mahabharata and consists of four divisions: infantry, cavalry, chariots, and elephants. The antiquity of chess in India dates back to the Indus Valley. Chess pieces have been found in Lothal, a site of Indus Valley from the 2400 BC. Through literature, Chaturanga can be traced back to the Gupta Empire of the 4th century. It traveled to Persia in the 7th century, where it came to be known as Shatrang, which subsequently became Shatranj. Shahnama, a famous epic from Persia, mentions an incident of how an Indian king gifted a chess set and chess pieces made of rubies and emeralds to Khosrow I, the emperor of Persia during the 6th century. The game came with a challenge which was successfully resolved by the courtiers of Khosrow. In the Indian version of Chaturanga, the king could be captured and this would end the game. It was the Persian version of Shatranj that introduced the idea of checkmate or warning that the king was under attack. This was done to avoid an early and accidental end of the game. In the Indian version of Chaturanga, the 8 into 8 board was called Ashtapada, while the pieces were Raja, that is modern day king, Mantri, which is modern day queen, Rath, that is modern day rook, Gaja, modern day bishop, Ashwa, modern day knight, and Padati or Sainik, that is modern day pawn. Ancient Indian chess involved throwing a dice along with the moves. Thus, the game combined luck with strategy and gave us a more accurate simulation of battles. A manuscript from Persia tells us an interesting story of an Indian old king Kumar whose days were numbered and who was succeeded by his son who was very young. At that time, enemies had invaded his kingdom from all sides. On being asked to prepare for a war, the young prince said, I have not seen a war and do not know how to fight. Can you show me how to defeat the enemy? One of the ministers brought a chess set and said, This is war, and everything you see here you will see at the war. The prince studied and understood the game, and then he went with an army to face the enemies, defeated them, and came back victorious. This story gives us a glimpse into the perception of the ancients about this game. Now, let us talk about the game of cards. It is believed that the idea of cards evolved from a variation of chess or chaturanga known as chaturaji. Chaturaji means a game of four things. It was played by four players, each with a king, minister, elephant, horses, and foot soldiers. Two players could ally with each other, and if one lost a king, the ally king would take its place. This was again a wonderful attempt at simulating a real battle. These rules formed the basis for the game of cards. It was known as Krida Patram in ancient India. The cards were made of cloth and carried beautiful motifs and artwork from Ramayana and Mahabharata. A pack of 10 cards have been found which portray the Dashavatara of Lord Vishnu. During the Mughal rule, the game became popular by the name of Ganjifa and was extremely popular among the masses. The highest card during that time was Ashwapati, which means Lord of the Horses, while some of the other cards were Gajapati, Narapati, Dhanapati, Dalapati, and so on. Now, let's talk about Ludo. Ludo has its origin in the ancient Indian game of Chopar and Pachisi. Traces of these games can be found as early as 3000 BC from the Indus Valley sites of Harappa and Lothal. Excavations at Mathura too have yielded rectangular dice from 1100 BC. There are numerous depictions and references in rock arts of Lord Shiva and Parvati playing Chopar in their pastimes. In fact, the famous dice game episode of Mahabharata talks about this very game. Chopar and Pachisi are still prevalent in the villages of North and South India. Pieces made of wood, metals, or precious stones of different colors and different sizes are used. The board is in the shape of a cruciform and is usually made up of embroidered cloth. But in villages, the board may be drawn on the floor and stones may be used as pieces. In the earlier version of the game, six kauris were used as dices. Based on the orientation of the kauris, the score was decided. The highest possible score was 25 or 25, hence the game being called Pachisi. There are other versions where rectangular dice were used. For example, the dice game of Mahabharata mentions rectangular dice called Pasha being used. The number of dice or kauris varied according to different versions. In England, a cubic die with a die cup was adopted and the game was patented as Ludo in 1896. The Royal Navy adopted the game as Akkars. It is still popular among the armed forces of several Western countries. Another adaptation of the game called Pachisi was launched in America by a company called Parker Brothers and involved two cube die. This was the same company which later launched games like Scrabble and Monopoly. Chopar and other dice games became popular, especially among gamblers. Instances of gambling have been mentioned in several Indian scriptures, suggesting that it was a popular pastime of many. The approach towards gambling in many earlier texts is casual. Kama Sutra mentions 64 arts that a woman should know, which includes skills like dancing, singing, etc. These skills were recommended to everyone to add an aesthetic to their personalities. However, texts such as Mahabharata warn us about the compulsion, addictiveness, and the miseries associated with it. The most famous instance being the famous dice game episode in Mahabharata, where Pandavas gambled away their entire kingdom and had to stay in exile for 13 years. The Arthashastra of Chanakya mentions gambling houses and talks about regulations and taxation associated with them. These gambling houses were legalized and regulated, and gambling outside of these gambling houses were considered illegal and punishable by law. And finally, let's talk about carom. Carom is said to have originated among the Maharajas of India during the 18th century. In fact, the oldest physical evidence of carom is a carom board made of glass situated in the palace of Patiala. These games, Ludo, Carom, Snakes and Ladders, card games, and chess, are popular all across the world. These games are played in every nook and corner and every household of India. Games like Carom and chess are recognized as international sports. We play these games totally unaware of their antiquity. While India takes a lot of pride in her ancient heritage, many of us remain totally oblivious to the fact that these games too are an integral part of our heritage. On this note, I come to the end of this video. If you did enjoy the video, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Also, feel free to check out our previous video on the origins of Panchatantra. And I will see you in the next video.